Good morning, everyone, and welcome. As a Dean of the College of Business, I'm delighted to have you join us this morning for our inaugural presentation for our first ever Dean's Distinguished Leadership Series. No pressure, Ray. We started this series to connect our incredible community of students, faculty, and staff, as well as our CSU community, to our alumni and business leaders who are truly making a difference all over the world. Today's speaker epitomizes what our college stands for. He understands how to use business to create a better world. It is truly my pleasure to introduce our inaugural speaker, Ray Boucher. He is a 1981 graduate of our Master's in Management program. Following the program, which he completed in only 1 year, by the way, he went to Pepperdine to receive his JD. Ray is a successful attorney who has tried more than 50 cases focusing on defending human rights and protecting consumers and the environment. Ray's career is truly spectacular. Over his 30-year career, he has helped obtain verdicts and settlements totaling more than $3 billion. He has represented Cesar Chavez, the family of a poisoned farm worker, and filed antitrust actions against wholesale electricity traders in California's deregulated energy market. He has achieved the landmark settlements for child victims of sexual abuse against the Catholic Diocese in Southern California, resulting in nearly 400 victims receiving over $850 million in settlements. In addition to his work in the courtroom, Ray has traveled to Uganda, where he provided pro bono legal services to teenagers who had been imprisoned awaiting trial for months. He helped schedule arraignments for the children, interviewed witnesses, and developed defenses for teens falsely accused of murder. For his amazing work and profound impact, Ray has earned many, many honors, including Trial Lawyers of the Decade, 2001 to 2010, by the Daily Journal, and the 2007 Consumer Attorney of the Year by Consumer Attorneys of California. He has previously spoken to law students at Stanford, Pepperdine, and Loyola to bar associations. He now serves as the founder and senior partner of Boucher LLP in Los Angeles. Throughout his career, Ray has championed individuals and causes around the world that otherwise would not have had a voice or representation. Through his dedication and leadership, he has truly changed the lives of so many to create a better world. We like to think that Ray's interest in social impact began when he was a student at Colorado State University. When Ray was working on his master's thesis, he studied the responsibility of business to mitigate the effects that sudden growth had on boomtowns on the western slope. This is a very atypical topic for a thesis at the time, but his thesis chair, Jim Francis, who has joined us today, supported Ray's vision. This sentiment has guided Ray's legal career and ultimately mirrors the college's current mission to use business to transform lives and create a better world. So we are honored, Ray, to have you speak with us today, and please join me in welcoming Ray Boucher.
Thank you. I was here about a year ago, and Dean Walker asked if I would be willing to come back up to the School of Business and speak. And I said, sure, thinking that I was coming to talk to a couple of classes like I do most of the time. And that's what I anticipated this morning was going to be. Until I was on Twitter a couple of days ago and saw this massive thing about some Distinguished Leadership Series, and it's the inaugural one, and so no great pressure. And I promised John that I put money out front so that anybody who paid for today, if at the end of the lecture you feel like you want a refund, I'll honor that refund. When I did my master's thesis, the concept of a corporation doing anything other than fast profits for shareholders was an anathema. My chair of my thesis committee refused initially to even think about allowing me to publish that thesis because it wasn't about Darwinism. It wasn't about the bottom line. It was asking an interesting question that at that time very few wanted to ask. In fact, Dr. Francis was at the forefront of the development of the idea of management of change, of bringing in other disciplines like sociology and like psychology into decision making and into the process of corporate America and the thinking that went into it. And so what I was trying to do at that time was to ask a basic question. Do corporations have a broader responsibility? Do they have an obligation and a duty beyond simply, putting money, fast profits into shareholders? And so in the corporate world, that's what you're taught. Right? You have to be above everyone else. And so when I looked at the lecture notes that I saw on Twitter from John, I thought, okay, now what do I do? Because I'm not a very funny guy, right? And I don't have a sense of humor. When I'm in front of a jury, the thing that connects me with the jury is that I'm honest and I'm sincere. And I believe in my client and what I'm asking them to do. But I don't tell jokes because I'm no good at it. So I asked my son Matthew, who's at Chicago, and I said, Matthew, what do I do? You're a student. He said, oh, Dad, don't worry about it. They'll love you. Great advice. So then I asked my son Raymond, who's a year old, and I said, what do you think? He said, Dad, just be entertaining. And I said, okay, now what? So I thought, okay, one of the most entertaining movies that I know of is The Princess Bride, right? And so I thought, okay, maybe I can borrow something from The Princess Bride. And so I grabbed Neil Montgomery's Guide to Networking Success. And I thought I would share it with you because I think it's useful. So my polite greeting is, good morning, welcome. My name is Raymond Boucher. The relevant personal link is that I am a former student, an alum, and rugby player. And here's proof that I actually went to College State University. That's not me with the bald head. That's me. But I had an incredible experience here at College State University. So then the question is, what can I talk to you about that might be of some use and some benefit and some help? Because I've had a blessed life. I have been at the forefront of incredible litigation that has had enormous impacts, and I've been blessed to be able to do that. I've met amazing people in doing so, and I've seen the best of the world, and I've seen the absolute worst of the world. And it's an amazing thing when you think about it, how things develop. And so one of the professors that I had here, his name was Dr. McKeever, big burly guy, massive hands. He would say something at every lecture that is the one thing in all of my schooling, from high school to college to graduate school to law school, that I've remembered. And it's interesting that it came from him in that class, but it's so true, and I use it all the time. And what he said was this. He said, people will do things in the name of a corporation that they will never do in their real life. They'll never do in their own name. They will do things under the umbrella and ambiguity and anonymity of a corporation that they would never do to a neighbor or a loved one or a member of their church or a member of their community. And at the time, I didn't quite understand it. When I was in your seats, I didn't understand what that meant. And I do now. And I'm hoping that as I take you through some of my experiences, what he said will resonate for you. And what I'd like to leave you with is the three things that I think are most important to take out of today and hopefully your experience here. And the first thing is voice. And there's a duality to voice. The first part of it is that inner voice, that little thing that sits on your shoulder and talks into your ear and sort of tells you, you know what, that's not the right thing to do. That voice that when you have to make a tough decision is saying, I'm not sure that's what you should be doing. And that comes down into your gut, and you can feel it. Don't lose that voice ever, because if you do, you'll make some bad decisions. And some of them we'll go through today. The second is the voice of courage, the voice of conviction. When this voice tells you no, make sure that this voice stands up and does the same thing. Because in your lives, you're going to be faced with decisions. You're going to be faced with opportunities. And they're going to be tough ones. You're going to be sitting at a desk, and you're going to be looking at your husband and daughter in a picture as your boss comes in and says, I want you to fire that bitch because she's pregnant. Or I want you to eliminate this person from this group because he smells bad. Or because of his racial background or some other arbitrary, non-performance-based decision. And I can tell you that I've had experiences that would make your skin crawl if you heard and saw what happens in corporate America every day. And the decisions that people have to make. You're sitting there. What are you going to do? You need your insurance. Your mom has cancer. You have to make sure the cancer treatment continues. And you're faced with a dilemma, a moral choice. Do I actually follow through and engage in market manipulation that will potentially destroy major communities in California? Do I manipulate the accounting records that will take away the pensions of hundreds and hundreds of people because I need this job? Will I put profits over people? And if I were to ask you today, how many of you would raise your hand right now and say, yes, I'm willing to put profit over people and make decisions that will kill individuals in order for us to make a higher profit in this business? Not one person. But I can tell you, you're going to face those dilemmas and those challenges. And so that voice that you have is the one thing that will help guide you through that. The second is perspective. Life is on a mathematical continuum, right? It's already started for all of us. We didn't have a lot of choice into when it began. We probably don't have a lot of choice into when it ends. But it's finite, and it will end. And during that time, maintain perspective. Recognize that this is your time in life to make an imprint in this world, in your community, with your families. The types of amazing things that you can do and changes that you can create in the world for the betterment of humankind. You have this amount of time to do it. And if you maintain that perspective in the workplace, in the corporate world that you live in, you'll do great things. And it'll help you ensure that you don't make bad decisions. And the third is empathy. And I recognize that empathy, and Dr. Francis, my academic advisor, would be rolling in his grave if I talked about empathy in the business school. But I actually believe that it is the foundation of most of the rules and most of the laws that you live by. Human resources is all about empathy. And if you don't believe me, go back and reread The Jungle. All of the decisions about the environment and environmental controls and responsibility are really come out of the question of empathy. And so the question becomes, what are your morals? What are your ethos? What are the ethics that you live by? And how do you bring them into the work environment and into corporate America? And so those are the three things that as I go through, and I'll ask you questions, because that's what I do. I'm a lawyer, I ask questions. I ask tough questions often. And I ask people why. Why did you make that decision? What was it that went into the decision-making process? What was your motivation? What were the alternatives? And you've got to be able to answer those questions to somebody like me and to be able to feel good about the response. Because I can tell you, again, back to perspective, there are countless businesses that rose to the highest levels and were regarded as, and we're going to look at one of them today, as the model to follow that are no longer in existence. They're on the wayside, in bankruptcy, and in one of the circumstances we're going to go through today, many of the leaders have been indicted and doing time in jail. And that's the reality of choices that we make. If we make the wrong choice, even under the ambiguity and umbrella of business, it can impact ourselves, our lives, our families forever. And so, the other thing, as a result of that in perspective, recognize this. You're going to have immense success in life. You're going to be at the top. But you're also going to fall. You're going to stumble. You're going to hit bottom. We all do. And that's okay. Because as Michael Franti tells you, it's when the teacher's in the room. And you're going to learn amazing things when you grow back up and you rise back up above that. And you will and you can. It's just perseverance, determination, and hard work. So keep an even keel. Don't get too high in the highs, even here in Colorado, and too low in the lows. Okay? So I want to talk to you about one of the first cases that I handled. And here's a map. I represented a woman named Maria Soledad Chavoya. I was representing Cesar Chavez at the time, and he called me up and he said, "Ray, can you come up to La Paz and talk to me?" And so I went up, sat down, and Cesar Chavez was the most amazing human being you can imagine. And we sat down, we started talking, and what he was telling me is that there was this man who was working in the fields who died. And he wanted me to take a look at it. And he left a wife and 4 children. So I said, of course. So I went down and took a look at it. So what happened? On August 5, 1985, Mr. Chavoya was ordered into the fields to pick lettuce. He was working at Murata Farms. He had been working for 6 weeks straight, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, without breaks, in the pounding heat of San Diego. The farm owner had the farm sprayed that morning with 2 pesticides and herbicides. Pyride from Shell and Monitor 4 from Chevron. There's a 24-hour requirement before anybody can be in the fields after a spraying. 2 hours later, his boss ordered all the farm workers and pickers into the fields and began picking. And they did. Within 2 hours, Mr. Chavoya started to get sick. By 3 o'clock, he stood up and he stumbled like he was drunk out of the field and he collapsed. The farm owner came over, kicked him, told his workers to get back to work. They went and got a van, and they brought the van up, and they threw him into the back of the van. Now, this is organic phosphate poisoning. So now I'm going to ask you that question. What would you do? Farmer tells you to do one thing. Your moral compass, your anchor tells you to do another. What do you think the farmer told Mr. Hitachi, who was the labor supervisor, to do? Do you think he told him to take Mr. Chavoya 2 blocks down the street to the clinic where they can reverse the effects of organic phosphate poisoning? No. The farm is Jamil up here. They drove Mr. Chavoya 2.5, almost 3 hours to Tijuana, where they dumped him in a clinic dead. A life that didn't have to lose. They treated him like a dog. How many of you would make that choice and decision? Mr. Tashi, he had 3 kids. Couldn't lose his job. I represented the Chavoya family against the farm and against Shell and Chevron. And the case against Shell and Chevron was that they knew that these 2 herbicides are used constantly, and they did testing individually for the effect that it would have on humans. But they never checked the synergistic effect. If you take the 2 of them together, since they're used with one another, what is the impact on human life, and what effect does it have? both those companies began doing that, at least analysis. Still doesn't do it enough. As a result of that case, Mrs. Chavoya and her family will be taken care of for the rest of their lives. But the one they love the most is gone, and they obviously will never see it again. How many of you, when you're sitting at the desk and you have an icon in an industry come up to you and say, you know what, I want you to make a product for $2,000. I don't care about safety. Safety does not sell. Safety does not sell. We just have to outdo the other side. We have to get these products out there so that the Japanese don't overtake our industry. Here's the guy, Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca was a head of Ford in North America in the 60s. And at the time, Toyota, Datsun, you guys don't know what Datsun is, but Datsun, all these manufacturers were dumping these, cute, fun, compact cars into the United States. And the fear was that the big three were going to go to the wayside, and they had to catch up. And so Lee says to his folks, I want a car, a compact car. I want it done within 24 months. Norm was 48 to 50 months. I want it to cost no more than $2,000, and I want it to weigh no more than 2,000 pounds. And so his engineers went to doing that. Halfway through the engineering process, they realized there was a fault. There was a problem. And they raised the issue. But they had already started tooling. This was Ford's own manufacturing plant, but they had already started tooling, and it was going to delay the production. The fix was fairly simple, $11 fix. You're the engineer responsible. What's your choice? You got Lee Iacocca, your boss, telling you, we're not retooling. We're going to do an assessment. Many of you may know what this assessment is, many of you may not, but this was the assessment. Cost-benefit analysis. The benefits. Savings, 180 burn deaths, 180 serious burn injuries, 2,100 burn vehicles. At a unit cost, $200,000 we'd have to pay out for each death, $67 we'd have to pay out for each injury, $700 we'd have to pay out for the cars. What's the total benefit? If we take those numbers, it turns out that it's going to cost us, we're going to spend $49.5 million to pay for the lives we're going to take by failing to fix the car versus the cost. 11 million cars, 1.5 million light trucks, times $11 per car, $11 per truck, multiply it out, it's 137 million. It's a simple equation. Let people burn. But the Pinto was a compact car that was a hatchback. That means that there's no rear doors. It was being sold to middle America, $2,000 a car. The primary audience was hardworking men and women, most of whom had 1 or 2 children. Where do you think the children were sitting? So the defect was that anytime there was a low-impact rear-end accident, this car had the possibility of incinerating, going up in flames almost immediately because of the way the manifold and the gas tank were designed. And that's what started to happen. Inferno after inferno after inferno, little kids sitting in the back of the seat with parents trying to save their child and unable to do so. So what happened? Based on those decisions, Lee Iacocca ultimately lost his job. All Pintos were recalled. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent in litigation costs. Ford's name was destroyed. Its reputation was destroyed for years and years and years. And the first corporate indictment for homicide in U.S. history in Indiana. If somebody had listened to that voice, if somebody had gained perspective, if somebody had an ounce of empathy, would they have made a different choice? And as you see, it's so short-sighted, because I can make a strong argument that if they'd have done the right thing, the shareholders would have been a hell of a lot better off. Ford would have been better off. And the conscience of people would have been something that they could live with. And of course, corporate America learned a lesson, right? Because we haven't had any problems since. Firestone tires, maybe, I don't know. Toyota, airbags. And, the interesting thing is Ford was challenging and chasing VW. And of course, VW is a model of corporate responsibility. VW, they didn't have a hybrid. So they wanted to figure out, how can we compete? So their idea was to bring in, and I'm trying to hit every academic area. So I want to get accountants, I want to get engineers, I want to get computer folks. So we're going to talk about computer people here, right? So they said to the computer people, look, we got to figure some way to defraud the United States government and to prove that our cars are more fuel efficient than the hybrids are, so that we can sell them for a hell of a lot more money and gain, a market foothold. So they sold 11 million cars that were rigged with a computer system that, when they were tested, would pass tests with respect to emissions, but in reality they were putting out 40 times more toxic fumes. How many of you, as the computer geniuses that are asked to engage in a exercise to find a way to defraud, how many are you going to say yes to that? And how are you going to find a way to say no? Well, when you look at that picture of your husband or your wife on the desk, and you think about what you look at night in the mirror, and what you want to wake up to looking at in the morning, think about who you want that reflection to be. Because the consequences, ultimately, I'm going to ask questions. Ultimately, it's going to be found out. Ultimately, you're not going to get away with it. Not usually, and not in the long run. So what happens here? How about that for a marketing moniker? For you marketing folks. So what happened? You go home. Hey, honey, how was your day? It was great. What is this about being charged with a fraud and, diesel emissions scandal? Is this what you want your children to see when you come home? That you were involved? 8 members were indicted. 2 are doing serious time. I can't ask questions. I represent salespeople who lost a significant amount of their income as a result of this. I can't ask the questions of the people responsible because they take the 5th. And they're in prison. So then how does that make you feel? I don't know. He's out of a job. You heard about sexual abuse. And I've been at the forefront of sexual abuse from the very beginning. And you would think that you learn a lesson, right? So now I want to tap into those of you in healthcare and those of you that are going into education. One of the first cases I had involving sexual abuse was a decorated Marine who came out of the Marines in 1969. He was an endocrinologist, one of the world's foremost endocrinologists. He dealt with children with diabetes and with growth hormone issues. In other words, at-risk children who already had a psychological makeup that was difficult for them to deal with as they fought through life. And he preyed upon them. And so as a part of the medical treatment that he gave them, he sexually abused virtually every single one, thousands and thousands and thousands of kids. By the early 1980s, and I think we could show ultimately in the 70s, but by the early 1980s, Kaiser Permanente and the partners were warned by several parents that their kids had been sexually abused. Now, you're the responsible person at Kaiser, right? You're the head. What are you going to do? You're going to do the right thing, right? You're going to turn Peter Fisher into the police. You're going to reach out to all the victims and try to see what you can do to help them through the issues that they are facing. And I can tell you, and later you can ask me some questions about it, but I still to this day get countless emails and messages from victims of childhood sexual abuse that are adults today, thanking us for giving them a voice, for helping them stand up out of silence. And I know you have an incredible program on behalf of human trafficking, slave trafficking, which is unimaginable that it goes on at such high levels and is okay with so many people because it makes a profit. And so at Kaiser, they didn't want to lose Peter Fisher. So what happens? They write a memo. Memos are always great. So they write a memo. They might have been writing it to me, I don't know. And it says, another victim came forward. Peter Fisher's been continuing to engage in sexual abuse. What do we have to do? Okay, well, the first thing is we have to make sure that he's no longer working with patients unless there's a chaperone in the room. Well, how about stopping him from working with patients? Mm-hmm. We're going to take the locks off the doors. And we're going to wait, God forbid, for more victims to come forward. When I asked, where's the requisition for the change of the locks? Well, we never got to that. Where's the notation to people that he can't be in there without a chaperone? Well, we never sent out a memo. Where's the notation in his file that you talked to him? Well, we didn't talk to him. You never sat down with Peter Fisher and told him that several people came forward and accused him of sexual abuse? No. So it continued for another decade until 1997 when Peter Fisher was finally indicted for childhood sexual abuse. He pled guilty to several counts and did time in Soledad. I actually had the opportunity to go up and visit him in Soledad and to question him about what happened and why, and how intervention might have helped protect other children. So, of course, this is an isolated incident, right? I mean, you have the Catholic Church and you have Kaiser Permanente, a prominent hospital. The heads of the hospital, good people in other circumstances. But we're not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. We're talking about over a 20-year period. Countless individuals who forgot to check into that voice and reasoned that there is some moral basis upon which to ignore and to essentially participate, active participants in the sexual abuse of countless more children. So now we go forward. Academia. What do we got? The entire gymnastics program in the United States decimated and gone. $540 million paid out by Michigan State. Those individuals that were protecting Nassar, all gone, all lost their jobs at the height of their careers, at the top of the academic ladder, because they didn't make the right choice. They were doing what they were told to do. They're all gone. Baylor University, Penn State University, and now USC, where I represent several victims. And at USC, there were several issues, but you had a doctor in the 1990s in the healthcare program who particularly liked Asian women. He would sexually abuse, sexually harass, engage in completely inappropriate conduct. There were nurses, there were doctors, there were administrators, there were teachers, there were heads of departments, and there was the president of the university. All co-conspirators participating in feeding him more and more and more young women whose lives have been seriously and significantly impacted and always will be. And they didn't do anything wrong. It's not their fault. Yet they carry guilt with them forever. Because people that know better, people that teach us about morals, people that teach us about ethics, people that teach us about the right way of doing things, failed that test. And now, at the height of his career, he's a disgraced former president and out of a job. So, how many people are going into oil and gas or the energy area? Anybody? All right, well, I'm going to dump on you anyhow. So, you heard about, so what is this? This is a check. This is a check from the Palestinian Investment Bank. Why do I have a check from the Palestinian Investment Bank up in front of me? This is a check that was paid, I think it was in 2004, to the families of a martyr, suicide bomber, who killed several people in the suicide bombing in Israel. What does that got to do with business? Saddam Hussein had upped the ante from what had previously been paid, and there's a scale that exists as to how much will be paid for each limb that's taken in a suicide bombing and ultimately for deaths. And in order to incentivize, he increased the amount, and ultimately $25,000 was the amount. The international community, obviously at some point in time clamped down on Saddam Hussein, and they engaged, they had the embargo on Iraq, and people could no longer trade with the Saudis. And it had a significant impact because during the period of time from 1997 until 2001, there were very few suicide bombings in the Middle East. And then something happened because the impact was horrific in terms of humanitarian impact on the people of Iraq, children, women, families, health, food. And so the United Nations decided to establish a food for oil program. And based on the program is that all contracts with the Saudi government had to be approved by the United Nations and the United Nations Council. There were penalties for those that circumvented those rules. There was a flaw in the system, and that was Saddam Hussein said, okay, but I need to approve the contracts. I need to approve them, SOMAS needs to approve them, which is the Iraqi oil ministry, all contracts. And so what he did in order to circumvent the rules was he started to charge a surcharge. And it was well known. It was caught very early on. And so the surcharge began to develop for him a war chest. And as that war chest grew, he began to pay for additional suicide bombings. And that war chest continued from 2001 all the way up to about 2005, when ultimately the United Nations got a hold of it. But they put out memos to all oil companies saying, you cannot buy unless you come through us. And that was the way to ensure there wasn't a surcharge. The way Saddam did it is he went through the Russians and the Turks and a couple of other groups of individuals and entities around the world. And he would tell them what that surcharge was. And then they would take and they would sell to U.S. companies or other companies around the world in order to circumvent the rules. And that's how they overcame the system. And so as a result, Saddam amassed $1.8 billion, most of it held in the Bank of Jordan. Here are the names and the lists of checks. I'm involved in several human rights and terrorism cases. This is one of the terrorism cases that I'm involved in. I actually was going to show you a video because we actually have video of Saddam's people at bazaars in the Middle East handing out the checks, almost like Vanna White. Do you know who Vanna White is? Here's the check number, the date of the check, the amount of the check, who was the beneficiary's name, the martyr's name, the residential area, and the extra information about it. So why am I talking to you about that? Chevron. The oil that comes out of Iraq is particularly adapt for their refineries. And so Chevron began buying oil through these intermediaries. Despite international law, despite U.S. law, despite all of the warnings that they were given, they were buying oil from brass companies that never bought oil in their entire existence, and they actually were caught on tape. Where at one point in time, one of the traders is on the phone with one of these intermediaries from Russia, and they, by mistake, the intermediary gave the price of the surcharge. And then he was asked, well, do we pay the lower price or the surcharge price? He said, it's okay, just go ahead and pay the surcharge price. And so Chevron made millions and millions and millions of dollars during the time that the United States had determined that it was illegal to trade with Saddam Hussein. And that money from the Russians into the Bank of Jordan, into the Bank of Palestine, into the homes of the martyrs who took the lives of a number of people. Corporate America, you're that trader. What are you going to do? How do you say no? What's your answer going to be? Because you're going to face this, trust me. Maybe not all at this level, but you're going to face things that are distasteful. And you're going to have to make choices. And if you make the wrong choices, I or somebody else is likely to ask you some tough questions. And in this circumstance, final judgment, they paid a nominal fine of $30 million. The trader, he's no longer working at Chevron. He did his duty, but he's gone. And the headlines. So now I want to talk about accounting. How much time do I have? Am I okay, Tom?
You are. You're good.
I am? Okay.
Yeah, it's a quarter up.
You don't know how much more I have, but all right. So I'm going to try to go fast. Coopers and Lybrand, accounting. There's a requirement in accounting that if the company you're working with has SEC requirements, that there are certain things that you have to do in certain barometers. I'm not going to bore you with all the details of it, but you have to meet certain requirements. So there's a company called First Pension. First Pension was into trust deeds and the sale and resale of secondary and third level trust deeds. And they had the pensions of 300 and some odd people, their entire life savings. And what they were doing is they were taking and investing it, but things started to go south. And so what they began to do is to take money from one entity, they created another entity, they put it over there, and when the audit was coming, they put enough money to pass the audit muster, and then they bring it back out to a related entity. There's a related entity analysis that you have to do as an accountant. And they were actually done, and they actually noted the related nature of these transactions and the fact that without the transaction there would be an SEC reporting requirement. But do you think anybody from Coopers and Lybrand actually reported it? No. And so in 1984, Coopers and Lybrand began seeing and understanding completely in their audits the lies, the theft, the fraud, the Ponzi scheme that existed, and rather than reporting it, rather than refusing to do the audit, they stamped okay, okay, okay. They did it in 84, 85, 86, 87, 88, all the way up to 1993 when the primary wrongdoers were finally indicted and imprisoned. I had the auditor on the stand. why did you change this number from a negative, meaning a reporting responsibility, to a positive? I don't know. Well, where are your records? I don't know. Turned out that they had destroyed all of the records when we filed the lawsuit associated with this particular audit. There's penalties for destroying records during a lawsuit. During the middle of the trial, funny thing, during the middle of the trial, there's an expert from another major accounting firm. He takes the stand and he's testifying, and I say, we didn't get those documents that he's talking about. So I asked the judge at a break, I said, Judge, can you order him to turn over the documents that we were supposed to be provided with? And he says, sure. Mr. Coyote, his name's not really Coyote, but a related animal, so I don't want to use it. Mr. Coyote, at lunch, go get your computer and bring it over. We want to see it. Okay. Lunch comes back, and of course you got a judge order, and you think he brought it over, right? No. He forgot it. And then he got sick, and he went home. So he had to bring it the next morning. So he brings it the next morning, and I have a computer expert with me, and we take it, we look at it, we see that he has destroyed on his hard drive a significant number of documents. And of course, the other side said, oh no, he never did that. So they bring in this guy from Houston, literally the same day, on a private plane with a whole bunch of Apple computers, and they're all colored differently. These are when they used to have the big screens that were all like football helmets. All these multiple colored things, and they wheel it into the conference room, and they check the computer, and they wheel it back out. He gets back on the plane, and they leave, and the next thing we know is there's a criminal lawyer here on behalf of Mr. Coyote who's going to defend him against the possible criminal charges he's about to face. So now you have an auditor who's lost his job, an expert who's disgraced himself and lost his job. You have a jury that has spent 7 months with us going through all these documents in Orange County, a conservative area. At the end of the case, 19 separate counts of fraud, malicious conduct, punitive damages, decisions that you make. Finally, one of the corporate people we were talking about earlier, Enron. When I began looking at the energy crisis, so right after the Coopers and Lybrand case, I began looking at the energy crisis in California. The governor, the attorney general, everybody was saying, oh, there's nothing we can do, there's nothing happening. And I and the lawyer that I was working on that other case, we began morning, noon, and night reviewing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of documents, and it was very clear what was happening. There was manipulation, intentional manipulation of the entire process, which was causing the blackouts. And Enron, which was on the front cover of Worth magazine as the darling, this was the Wall Street darling. This is how you wanted to run your corporation. Went from nothing to billions of dollars worth of net worth. All based on fraud, all based on Ponzi schemes. And what they did in California was they engaged in these processes, the Death Star. Those of you that know anything about science fiction movies, you understand what Death Star is. Fat Boy you may not know so much about. That is a reference to the two bombs that were used in the atomic bombs that were the only two atomic bombs that were dropped on populations in history, and then Ricochet is where they were engaged in manipulation, where they would take energy, send it outside of California, at a lower price that was capped, and then bring it back at a high price. What they were doing with Death Star is that in California you have 2 transmission lines that goes to 3 transmission lines that goes back down to 1 transmission line in a really populated area. And so it creates congestion. So what Enron said is, okay, we don't actually have any energy, but we're going to post energy anyhow because the ISO is going to have to pay us a premium above and beyond the actual cost of energy for us to take it off. So they were taking phantom energy, putting it on, and making millions and millions of dollars. And what did Schilling tell his traders? Schilling was a bad guy. He just got out of prison. He's on house arrest. He's got a bracelet on his ankle. Not what he expected back then. But anyhow, Schilling, bad guy. One thing he said to everybody is 15% of everybody that works for me gets fired no matter what every year. I don't care whether they're doing their job correctly or not, they're fired. Secondly thing he said is if you can't trade in California, I don't care. If you can't trade in California, if you can't manipulate that market, if it's a problem for you, you shouldn't be here. Go get another job. You can trade pork bellies on the Chicago Exchange. Millions upon millions upon millions of dollars gone. janitors who worked for that company and invested all of their money because that's what Schilling and Lay told them to do. As Schilling and Lay were taking money out, they're telling all these janitors and all these low-level workers to put all your money back in. They lost everything. California lost billions of dollars. And so when we sued them, Duke, Dynegy, Enron, we were ultimately able to get those companies to renegotiate their contracts, and we were able to recoup somewhere in the neighborhood of, I don't know, $4.5 to $6 billion back to California as a result of it. And there's your buddy. That's his mugshot, Mr. Skilling. So how would you like to go home and show this picture to your wife or to your kids? He lost his moral compass, and those people that worked for him didn't have the courage to stand up. They couldn't find their voice. Now I want to bring it to a local flavor. I represented some individuals who had bought herbs from Herb Time. Herb Time was one of the largest herb producers and distributors in the country. And they had 100 acres that was dedicated to growing USDA certified organic herbs, and they had 500 acres that were for conventional farm herbs. And when supply lagged behind demand, what do you think Herb Time did? Well, there was a case out of Aurora Dairies here in Colorado where a judge said, you know what, if it's USDA and it's been stamped, it's preempted and there's nothing anybody can do about it, you can't bring a lawsuit, you can't fix the problem, it's the USDA's problem. And so everyone around the country refused to take cases and bring lawsuits to try to correct behavior based upon that decision. We looked at it and I thought the decision was poorly reasoned, I thought it was poorly written, and I thought it was interpreted incorrectly. And so we brought a lawsuit on behalf of people that had purchased from Herb Time, because what we found out was this. They would take herbs from the farm in Ventura, which is the 500 acres. They would truck them down to Orange County, which was a 100-acre farm, and they would just mix them together. You know, no big deal. Just put them together and send them out as though they were all organic, even though these were laced with pesticides and these were allegedly organic. And it is an interesting thing. I got a knock on my door at the office one day, and here comes the entire, think of it, I have my conference room, the entire USDA Enforcement Division, because they saw this lawsuit that we filed. The entire division. Now, how many people have seen Good Morning Vietnam? Anybody? Okay, so in Good Morning Vietnam, there are these two great characters. They're twin brothers, and they are the ones that are censoring the information going out, right? If you remember when Robin Williams was about ready to grab and go out because he's pissed off at what just happened and talk on the air, these two brothers are trying to censor what he's supposed to do. So the entire USDA Enforcement Division, where's these two guys? I'm going to call them Billy and Bob. And they look like the two characters out of Good Morning Vietnam. And they sat down in my office and they say, we need your help. We're it. I said, well, what do you mean you're it? We're it for the entire United States. Really? For organics, it doesn't matter whether it's meat, fish, I mean not fish, but meat, herbs, milk, we're it. We're the entire Enforcement Division. So I provided them with the information that they needed, and whether or not they were able to do anything, I don't know, but Herb Time is now out of business. What did we do? We brought the lawsuit. This is Aurora Dairy. That was my pun, by the way, local flavor. And the California Supreme Court in Casado versus Herb Time. It took us 10 years to bring this case. We were in federal court, knocked out of federal court, in state court, knocked out of state court, back in state court. The judge, Judge Carl West, I like to kid him about this decision because when he threw us out, he had something funny to say. And so now I get the upper hand and the upper lap. But as the court said, to buyers and sellers alike, labels matter. They serve as markers for a host of tangible and intangible qualities. Consumers may come to associate with a particular source or method of production. Misrepresentations and label labeling undermine this significant function, preventing consumers from correctly identifying the goods and services that carry the attributes they desire, while also hampering honest producers' attempts to differentiate their merchandise from the competition. What's best for the shareholders? Does ethics and ethos matter? Think about it. If the person at Kaiser was sitting at home and they saw Peter Fisher begin to sexually abuse their child, would they have had the same result? In every one of these circumstances, if you take it out from the umbrella and anonymity of the corporation and you put your name on it, and you think about, as you look at that picture on your desk, instead looking at the newsreels, because when we think about what's happening, we always think about the worst. Oh my God, I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to lose my health benefits. What am I going to do? I have to support my family. And those are all legitimate concerns and fears. But also play through the end game. The CNN ticker that says you've been imprisoned for fraud because that VW computer person, he's in jail. Not the people that forced him to do it. He's in jail. Time and time and time again, you're going to be faced with these decisions. And so, you know, I've had an incredible, incredible life, and I love every aspect of what I do. I look at you, I look at my sons Raymond and Matthew, and I know that you are the greatest generation. You will do great things in this world. The opportunities, the intelligence, the ethos that you carry with you right now is just above and beyond anything that my generation or any generation before me has ever faced, ever seen. And so, understand the tremendous opportunities that you have at your hand and the incredible things that you will do. And when you're on top, don't get too enamored with that. And when you hit bottom, don't let it take away your heart. Because you will bounce back from both of those highs and from those lows. As you go forward in life, make those moral choices. Make those ethical choices and always go back to find your anchor. Because your anchor will never steer you wrong. Thank you very much.
I want to tell everyone, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. We also have a reception right after upstairs in the lobby. Lots of great food, so you're all invited to go there, and we'll have more time to spend with Ray. But does anyone have a question?
Hi, thank you so much for putting that collection of cases together to make your points. My question has to do with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act and the case. I know you did the auditor side of the litigation, but was there any litigation against the management of that company?
So the 4 primary wrongdoers that went to prison were all from the company itself. They all went to prison based on the act itself. Nobody from Coopers and Lybrand ever did, but as a result of this case, several lost their jobs.
Are there any hopeful stories that you see right now that give us?
See, to me, all of these are hopeful stories. They're all hopeful stories because I'll tell you a story. Bobby Wittizak, triple amputee Vietnam veteran. Second case I handled, right at the same time as the Bohemian case. He had a supervisor that blew the whistle on a Rockwell for engaging in improper and fraudulent billing from a fixed cost to a cost plus. The stealth model was cost plus, and so they would take overrings on the fixed cost and then put it on the cost plus. Bobby Wittizak was questioned. He supported his supervisor and told the truth. Triple amputee Vietnam vet in a wheelchair. As a result of him telling the truth, what did they do? They hit his wheelchair. They took away his card. They took away the person that was supposed to help him. When he would have to go get parts, he would take his hook hand and have to go in and wrap it around bars and climb up to get parts above and bring them down. Put them on the cart and deliver them until finally he succumbed and he couldn't do it any longer. We sued. Rockwell said, never happened. This is all baloney. I took 50 depositions. The 49th person that I deposed sat there in tears and told the truth. And from 50 to 75, there were another 10 to 15 that came forward. Bobby Wittizak called me and he said, Ray, I need you to settle my case no matter what. I have no food. They've turned off my water. They've turned off my electricity. My van doesn't work. I can't get around. I said, Bobby, some of your coworkers have come forward. Just give me a little more time. Within a week, we resolved that case for multiple seven figures, and Bobby Wittizak will be taken care of for the rest of his life. People who have courage, and they have it all the time. In the church cases, nuns, priests came forward. They stood up as oaks against adversity, against risk, and they did the right thing. In a case involving discrimination, we had this massive, I made them massive because I blew them up, but they were these caricatures that were put into the lockers of these two police officers who testified truthfully at trial. And as a result of that, Chip and Dale, running nigger targets, I mean, things that would just make your skin crawl were put into those things. And ultimately, when they were under fire in the field, nobody came to their aid. They ultimately had to walk away from the job. In the taking of depositions of those individuals, several people came forward. And both of those individuals now are in law enforcement and doing incredible. One of the models that I represented early on who had been sexually abused as a 16-year-old, she just literally 2 weeks ago sent me a message. And she stayed in contact. She says, I can't tell you how thankful I am. At the time, I felt honored to be represented, and I was afraid. You helped resolve the case, and it's taken me 20 years now to realize that standing up gave me back a voice. And now, not only do I have a voice, but I now have perspective, and I realize that what happened to me is a part of my life, and I'm willing to now accept that. And I'm now moving on in my life in a way that gives me freedom. Everything that I have been involved in has hope involved in it. Everything that I have been involved in has had people that did the right things, that made the right choices. And in most circumstances, most people, if given that opportunity, will do those things. There's tremendous hope. There's tremendous love. There's tremendous humanity out there. It just doesn't always shine under some circumstances. And so if you stand up to it, you can always look in that mirror. And I can tell you countless times, countless people that have done that. And it's just a blessing to have been able to meet them and to see them and to see what they've done.
One more, Scott.
So for my generation and the next generation coming up, and we look and see these challenges with white collar crime and under the punishment versus the crime and sort of the victimless crime mindset, regulatory capture, some of those big pieces that we as individuals look and see, people maybe 20, 30 years older than us kind of being the reason that exists. What can we do as we sort of climb through our careers or position ourselves forward to help break up that corporate power versus the individual, or breaking up some of that regulatory capture? How do we fight that when we see that as some of the cause of so many of the imbalances we see currently?
It's a good question. There's no easy answer to it, but there are several things. One is change can come about both in small and large ways. You have in your hands the ability and the power to create that change. Part of it's mindset. Collective mindset has a greater opportunity to create change. I mean, the great philosophers teach us that change comes about primarily as a result of fear and motivation, right? And fear is the greatest motivator. And so for corporate America, for decision makers, the one thing they fear is a collective mind, meaning the people are opposing them in some fashion because it grows. I mean, the idea of a clean building 20 years ago, I mean, but now it's a part of our everyday lives. And so vote, get involved in the community, fight the corporate culture that is antagonistic to those feelings and those beliefs. Don't be deterred. Don't give out. Go arm in arm with others. It may not happen overnight, but it will happen, and it continues to happen. The changes that have taken place from when I first had my thesis that was absolutely against every grain of this school, but they let me out anyhow, probably because they wanted me out. But think about that. What you're doing today wasn't even conceivable back then. And the number of scholars that this school and other schools put out with it are like-minded, that are making changes in communities around the world is absolutely amazing. And so when you get to the question of white-collar crime and the things that people do and the decisions that they make, 1, legally, 2, politically, 3, internally, and 4, collective power. Collective power.
Thank you again. Thank you for those